As a child, you grew up with the vulnerability of being shown many different views by many different people. The most important one, however, is that of your family. Being a child, you grew up to never ever question your parents' authority, and this is supposed to shape your life in adulthood. This is even more true when it comes to religion. I think everyone with religious parents can vouch that childhood is even worse when you add religious pressure on top. However, when you can look at life away from such pressures, it opens up a whole new world. Allow me to introduce you to the world of blankets. Blankets is Craig Thompson's illustrated autobiography that centers around his coming of age and his struggle with his identity, as well as his first love. The story starts with Craig in his youth and describes the trauma he went through with his father and babysitter and the expectations that he was given because of his religion. This book is a question. It tells a message through the life of Thompson and allows the reader to be immersed in the details of the story with its art and incredible storytelling. Today, I would like to tell you how this book impacted me in such an interesting and unique way. Before I talk about the story, I want to talk about the genius of Craig Thompson's art. With expressive line work, figure work, and emotive characters, these are all tools of an amazing storyteller. Being able to tell a story as rich and as personal as Blankets while also being able to express the story through such amazing dynamic art is so impressive. The art creates a feeling of warmth and wraps me around as I read, muting the harshness of the outside. Thompson takes me in and makes me experience the memories, the cold, the internal conflict like a blanket. This blanket does not always protect us, however. There are some moments when the past is too present to be warded away. Memories haunt Craig, an experience represented masterfully by the reproduction of the same images in new context throughout the book. How present events trigger their past in some ways unexpected. Scott McCloud in his landmark Understanding Comics says that no other art form gives so much to its audience while asking so much from them as well. What he means by this is that comics require closure. From panel to panel, the reader must make the connections. In this way, comics are immersive because of the work they need to make sense. If done effectively, McCloud argues that we get sucked into the story without realizing our subconscious effort to make that happen. This is how I see Blankets. Images appear throughout the novel that at face value make sense in their context. But as you read, you realize those images are actually memories, flashbacks from Craig's past. This realization is an act of closure by you because you are the one telling the story. Thompson is giving you the images. You are immersed, and you are Craig, constructing a narrative out of random moments. It's honestly hard to describe how this art makes me feel, but it complements Thompson's writing style so well. Thompson makes clever use throughout Blankets of the sequential art narrative medium structure, codes, and conventions. Thompson changes, ever so slightly at times and more pronounced at others, the aesthetic of the text. One such way that this occurs is Thompson's configuration of panels. Some pages have rigidly bordered panels, others have panels where words or images break the border, others have bending and curving panels, others don't even have any borders at all. These varying constructions convey just as much meaning in Blankets as the visuals and text, and it's on some of these panels that I want to focus. He plays with panel structure, shape, and texture, breaks through panels, interlaces them for effect, and portrays scenes with a complete absence of panel structure in some parts. He only breaks with convention to work in conjunction with the narrative. Every move is calculated and has a reason. For example, on pages 125 to 126, this absence of panels imparts a sense of interconnectedness and otherworldliness, separated from space and time. Conversely, in the final panel of page 101, the absence of a panel border gives us an immediate sense of disconnection. We feel as Raina and Craig do, feeling the absence of the other via the breaking of the panel. He uses this again when Craig's stay at Raina's comes to an end, and her car drives off the edge of the world, enacting what Craig is thinking seeing the car go off. One of my favorite things about the art is how it uses scale and shade. The scale of characters is primarily used when describing Craig's early life. He uses scale to indicate the place that specific characters have in Craig's life. His abusive and incredibly religious father often has a large scale, and at the beginning of the book, most of Craig's opposing forces do. His babysitter, for example, who's implied to have sexually assaulted Craig and his brother, also has a larger and more dynamic scale in most of the panels that he's in. Another example is when Craig is being bullied and he gets thrown off a fence, and the panel shows extreme separation between him and his bullies, with him being at the bottom and the bullies being at the top. Now, despite being a visual autobiography, Thompson is able to use dreams and his childhood love of drawing to express his mind in a way that is so good I can barely explain. In Craig's adult life, he uses shade in addition to scale to highlight Craig's social anxiety and his fear of people, like how at church camp the counselors blacked out when he and Raina are skipping service. These two stories, Craig as a child and Craig as a young adult, are expressed amazingly through the art as well. So with that, I want to transition into This entire story is connected. Seamlessly, piece by piece, page by page, Thompson intertwined every narrative together so well, and this continues the recurring theme of blankets and just how important to the narrative they are. The blanket Craig and his brother share as children, the quilt that Raina makes for Craig are all heavily featured. Arguably most important part of the story is child Craig. The story starts off with this version of Craig and sets the groundwork for Craig's worldview. The first page we see in the book is Craig and his brother Phil, and sets their dynamic in place early. Then one of the main themes of this version of Craig is put into play: authoritarianism, the enforcement or advocacy of strict obedience to authority at the expense of personal freedom. Craig's father is an antagonistic force to Craig and is shown to be abusive, most likely physically as well as mentally. When Craig's father enters the room after Craig falls off the bed, he starts shouting at the brothers, and when they ask why they have to sleep in the same bed, he shouts, "Don't question your parents' authority." This theme is persistent in Craig's early life and shows just how much power people have over him. Not just his father, but his babysitter, his teacher, his pastor, etc. Craig never had a childhood where he could really express himself. Instead, he was torn with the concept of heaven and hell, and here's another very consistent theme throughout the book: how religion has shaped Craig's life and thought process. Craig even gets bullied frequently by his peers for his family being poor and extremely religious. The only way Craig could get away is by using his imagination. Drawing was a big escape, and this is a big thing throughout his entire life. When he's with Raina to express his love to her, and even with his drawings to her when they first started talking, or Kid Craig using art and his imagination to escape life and bond with people around him. His art, however, gets put down multiple times in the story by people in his life as well as himself. Craig's family, who are religious to the point of near fanaticism, regularly make Craig feel guilty for the things he draws and for not putting more effort and attention into serving God. Craig has been raised to believe that the Bible is the literal word of God, and that is beyond question or refutation. This is a major source of guilt and inner conflict for Craig, but yet it's still a part of himself that he will always come back to. One thing I think I like the most about this story is just how it feels reading. It feels so comfortable to read. It has a coat of softness that can even make the saddest times feel like a trip on a cloud. It captures the creativity and the fantasy element of being a child. To page 77, where child Craig goes to church camp and is still an outsider there, being bullied and ridiculed by the children there in what is supposed to be a place of harmony. The first night he sneaks out to get peace of mind, and then the book transitions into Craig and his teens at church camp. This version of Craig kind of stumbles his way through life, and I think that makes everything he does a lot more relatable and graceful. The blossoming and growth of Craig and Raina's relationship is pretty much the rest of the novel, which seems like it could lead to boring or stereotypical comments about young love, but Blankets goes for a different course. Thompson, in the narration of the relationship between him and his first love, ties in fragments of his childhood and moments of her childhood, like I described before, building their relationship in a naturalistic, anti-hyperdramatic, and anti-sexual way. As their relationship progresses, Thompson sees Raina as nearly a goddess, with the way he worships her for her natural beauty and poise in the midst of handling her parents' divorce, caring for her mentally disabled older brother and sister, and nurturing her niece whose parents completely disregard her. Raina is a really complex character, and while I won't go into her, I do think knowing how much Craig loved her is important for understanding him. By the end of the Blankets, much of the dogmatism of Thompson's Christianity has kind of evaporated in the process of placing Raina up on a pedestal after spending 2 weeks with her in her home in Michigan. Thompson feels conflicted between earthly love with desires and divine love with reverence of a superior, perfect being. In worshiping Raina, his love for her is that of divine love instead of love between two partners, making it almost suffocating and overwhelming to Raina when the two are apart. When Raina calls Craig to end their romantic relationship, he begins to attempt to reconcile the concepts of earthly love versus divine love. As Thompson becomes enraptured by the book of Ecclesiastes, his faith moves away from the blinded, fervent devotion of a divine, infallible, omnipotent being who must be worshipped in the church with song and ritual, through his admiration of all of God's creations, with the understanding that it is all fleeting and transforming. From this enlightenment of faith, Craig also realizes that his love for Raina is unsustainable and ends their friendship. For his abstract love for Raina prevents him from understanding how to love her as another fallible human being. In a moment of parallel symbolism, Craig destroys all the gifts that Raina had given him, with the exception of a quilt that had become idolatry for him, paralleling his concurrent distancing from the church and the eventual hiding of his Bible. By placing God, Christ, and Raina on a pedestal of perfection, Craig is unable to fully develop his true sense of faith in God and love for another human, stunting his ability to make a decision to move forward with his life because he views himself as an inferior being. With the discovery of his faith and his understanding of his relationship with Raina, Craig makes the final decision in his path with his decision to go to art school after graduation, a decision which he could not make before because he once feared that going to art school would be sinful. But who really cares anymore? The ending of this book is just beautiful. Craig visits his parents for Christmas and finds his quote from Raina in his Bible. And him revisiting these items is so poetic, especially in the way that he does. Then later, he goes for a walk outside, and while walking in the snow, he jumps, which leads to a gap in his footprints. And he says, "How satisfying it is to leave a mark on a blank surface, to make a map of my movement, no matter how temporary." Blankets is one of the most powerful stories I have ever read. It single-handedly motivated me to look beyond my surroundings. There comes times where I'm alone and I pick this book up and I read certain sections and it feels like I stuck my head above the clouds. Craig Thompson is one of the best writers when it comes to making you feel something. The pacing of Blankets was so perfect that I found myself completely immersed in the story. I felt like an omnipresent figure within this universe, observing the beautifully complex relationships between all of the inhabitants. While there was one overarching story, Thompson breaks up the plot by switching between his childhood and young adulthood. This not only adds greater depth to the characters, but allows the reader to understand the origin of his beliefs and how they ultimately affected the decisions he made during the later acts. His characters have a whole different level of real to them. In Blankets, especially because it is an autobiography about his life, there are so many scenes in Blake that are so beautifully written and illustrated. The complex depictions of love, torment, and dreaming are a pleasure to experience. Through the engaging pages, Craig experiences the joy and exhilaration, as well as the heartbreak following a first love, and all the while trying to reconcile it all with his religion or the religion of his parents, which was a small-town fundamentalist Christian religion. I was also brought up in a strict fundamentalist religion growing up, so I was able to relate to this on so many levels. And I want it to be absolutely clear, I am not an atheist. I'm not a Christian either. I'm just Wisehat. But anyway, in this way, the story was at times heartbreaking and at other times joyful, painful to read in some, hopeful to read in others. Good memories as well as bad, and I ended up tearing up on some pages and smiling in others. Thompson's writing poetically captures what it's like to hold on to memories, to cling to the past. They are like blankets held close, and the comforting dreams they offer can be more appealing than reality. Blankets is a phenomenal creation that explores a variety of themes which most people have experienced in some sense, whether it's questioning beliefs, developing passionate relationships, or wading through life with utter uncertainty. This piece uses a beautiful art style and unique perspectives to depict life in a scaringly human way. Everything it set out to do, it achieved. Ultimately, it was not created to tell a story of intense nobility or to challenge the boundaries of the medium, which it did. It was created to depict an important aspect of life at an important stage in time, and it is done perfectly.